I wanted to see if I could recreate Robbers by the 1975 in under 2 hours. So after digging through all of my plugins, recording a bunch of guitars, I came up with this. And I want to show you guys how I did it. But first, if you're new to this channel, hit subscribe. I do one of these videos every Friday. Also, if you want to vote on what song you think I should recreate next, there's a Google form in the description. And now onto the track. So the main recognizable part of this song, I would say, are the guitars, which all together sound like this. So let's just look at each of those individually. We have these three guys here, which are doing this sort of like plucking motion. After listening to the song, it kind of felt like there were 3 parts, so I did this one here in the middle, which is just kind of a static E. You can actually hear it continuing this into the verses. And since we have this sort of lower E, that's the tonic of the key that we're in, we're in E major, we're gonna add these other 2 on the left and the right to sort of spice it up a little bit. So we have this one here on the right, which you can hear is doing this sort of like back and forth melody higher up. And then we have this one on the left, adding a little bit of a chord. And the effect is that these guys kind of feel like they're almost one instrument, as if they're like this synth that is heavily syncopated and grounded in the key that we're in. This is one of those times where I would say it is essential that you quantize them, because these guys are already just a little bit off. Like, I debated doing this bottom one a little bit more, but I felt like I could get away with it being a little bit off just because it's a 2-note interval. So the scrape of the first note hits here and then the next note hits here, and that spot in between is kind of where we have these guys landing. Basically, I just time aligned it enough to the point where when I hit play, it feels like it's a synth. I recorded all these guys with my Jazz Master. I kept the pickup in the middle position because I just felt like the noise that was coming from the amp, it just sounded better in this middle position, because then when you have these 2 together, it kind of cancels it out a bit. You also get some nice tubiness when you're using both of these. For the tone, I made this preset in Guitar Rig. If you want to see a breakdown of this tone, you can watch the It's Not Living If It's Not With You video. Basically a noise gate to clean things up, some pretty heavy compression to keep the notes consistent going into the front of the amp, going into a high watt amp, turned the treble down quite a bit, going into an 1176 to level it out volume wise after that, and then just shaping it with some EQ. This distortion I'm basically only using for that lead line, which we can look at now. This is the part that like everybody knows. Same tone, just dialed a little bit differently. Also using the distortion pedal here, which is kind of like a Boss style distortion. Main reason I use that pedal a lot in my patches is because this era of 1975, Adam from the 1975 was using Boss pedals and was playing a lot of tones that were, I don't want to say basic, but like they weren't like overly complex. Like he was using the ME800 for a long time. I think I saw them recently on tour this last time, and I think he still uses it a little bit. But yeah, this guy is super high up on the neck, like almost the max of what you can get in terms of the range of a guitar like that. Like you're playing on the highest frets possible and you're just driving the crap out of it with this. Also, I really love this Brainworks delay. It's become like one of my favorite delays for sound design stuff already, just because it's so easy to get a tone. Like if I turn everything off, it sounds like this. With it on, I'm not even using all the features with it right now, but I really want to dive into this because any delay that has a panic button is worth diving into. Then in the chorus, we have these guys, which are just strummed out. Same patch, but removed a bit of the low end and the mid-range in it just because it was a little bit woofy. I also was very intentional not to strum out like the top of the chord, like not the high E or the B strings, just because it felt like this wanted to stay sort of like lower. The final guitar layer which I added is this guy, which was super fun to record. Essentially, I got this guy a while ago. It is a sort of cheaper version of what is commonly known as an EBO. So it's a little electromagnet that you put on top of your guitar, and it like holds the string note out. So you get these coils next to the string, and it just makes it sustain for forever. And so I was doing this performance with the Jazz Master where I would like sort of push it down a little bit and then lighten up just before the downbeat. And you can see it does like this weird volume swell, and it almost detunes the string a little bit. It's just a fun little texture thing. For our bass, I actually tried something new recently, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. It's a plugin from IK Multimedia called Modo Bass, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. It's one of the more like comprehensive like virtual bass plugins that I've used. Like you can pick between a bunch of different models or playing styles. You can choose whether or not you're using like regular wounds or flat wounds. And yeah, it's just super comprehensive. And I basically just swapped it to this Music Man bass because I wanted a low fifth string, and it had the right tone, and it was essentially done. Running it through a little bit of parallel optical compression, and then just a little bit of track spacer connected to the kick. Now let's go through the drums, which sound like this. So for these drums, I'm using the Superior Drummer EZX kit. Honestly, I'm probably gonna upgrade to Superior Drummer 3.0 soon, now that I have like a bigger hard drive installed for it. But honestly, I've gotten a lot of use out of Superior Drummer 2.0. But yeah, it looks like we're using like a Gretsch kick and the Jeff Ochiltree snare with some Master Sound hats. And we actually have the kick and the snare routed out separately on their own channels. So the kick drum is here by itself. And for that, I'm just using a little bit of Kilohertz transient shaper just to lower the sustain a little bit, bring up some of the attack, which I find tends to be the norm when I'm mixing kick drums, at least the direct mic normally. A little bit of C4, just to tame the low end a bit, and then some EQ. Again, you don't really need to go super heavy with the EZX stuff because it is kind of pre-mixed. And then here for the snare, I think I'm pretty much just using some EQs to tame some of those resonant frequencies a bit. There were some weird overtones that I just wanted to pull out. And then here is a snare that I'm layering underneath that, which I just duplicated the MIDI from this guy up here and then put it on the separate track with the drum rack. So this guy's playing this, which is like a super heavy, aggressive EDM snare, which I got from watching this video that Roland did with George, the drummer from the 1975, like almost 10 years ago when they were doing the first like black and white album. And he was pretty aggressive with his use of like the SPD, and they would use this sort of like Primus snare sample underneath their main snare sound live. And so I just went on Splice and found an EDM sample that I thought fit that vibe. And then I'm sending both of those snares to a group with some VCA compression and a little bit of gated reverb. I find the compression tends to glue multiple samples together pretty well. On the actual track that has the rest of the kit, so everything minus the snare and the kick mic, using some more VCA compression, and then high passing it a bit with this guy down here, because there's a bunch of low end baked into this kick drum sample, and it was getting a little bit woofy when I left all the low end up here in the overheads. And then all of these guys are going into a little bit of effect compression on the top. So here's everything turned off. And here's everything turned back on. Just a little bit tighter and rounder as a kit. And the only thing we have left are some synth sounds. So this is probably the most recognizable one, which I got from using the Contact Retro Machines stuff. I got the Chroma Brass sound. And as you can see, it's playing this just ARP over and over again. I actually took this same MIDI and just duplicated it across like 4 different octaves, because whenever I would do it in like 1 octave range, it would just never sound right. Then we do some EQ. Again, some more Brainworks delay. Then a little bit of RC20 to make it weird. And that's how you get it. So now let's look at the last thing, which is probably the weirdest thing that I did for this track, which you can see this track is actually empty. And there's a very good reason for that. It is because I'm using VCV rack, which I am debating on how deep I want to go into this, because modular synthesis is kind of a really deep rabbit hole, and I'm not sure how deep I want to go into it in this video. If you want me to go a little bit deeper on it, I can try to do a song in the future with more modular and go a little bit deeper into it. But essentially, VCV rack is a virtual modular setup where I can right click here and I basically have access to a bunch of different plugins. Here, it's actually kind of hard to like scroll through all of them right here. But a thing to note is that these aren't just like plugins in the traditional sense. These are, for the most part, pieces or building blocks of a synthesizer. So if I wanted to find a specific filter, these are all the filters that I have available. If I wanted an oscillator, these are all the oscillators that I have available. And so it's really fun for sound design stuff. You can get a free version of this. I personally bought the full version, which I think is like 220 bucks, and it's been more than worth it, because with the paid version, you can use it as a plugin inside of a DAW, but you can also get an effects version of it. So if you just wanted to use it as a really weird like guitar pedal or multi-effects unit, you can do that. I have client tracks where I've had multiple tape delays being shifted and messed around, and it's really fun. So for this track, I will try to keep it as simple as possible. This top row here is the stuff that's making the sounds, and then there's some modulation happening down here. So here we have this module, which is taking the BPM information from Ableton, and it's sending it to a clock, which is just a way to tell your modular patch what BPM you're at. It is then triggering this step sequencer. I just hit random and it generated these random notes. These guys are then going into a quantizer, which is transposing any notes that this thing creates into the key of E major. That is going into this oscillator, which is like the oscillator on a synth. It's like generating the tone. I have this LFO, which is slightly changing this knob like microscopically, just so like the timbre of it changes a bit. I have this filter here, which I'm just kind of using as like a mute. So here, let me show you what this sounds like without any effects. After that, we are sending it to this tape delay. Sounds like this. You can hear there's like a weird warble between the left and the right. It's adding this cool little like detune effect. After that, we are going into what is essentially a virtual version of Clouds by Mutable Instruments, which is like a granular texture synthesizer. And then all of that is going into Plateau, which is one of my favorite reverbs ever. And it's just this beautiful little pad. And yeah, Euro rack stuff is just super fun, if I'm being honest. I'm planning out building out an actual like live rack here for a bit. And then let's go through our chain on the front. I'm messing around with some of the mix bus stuff inside of Slate Virtual Mix Rack. I was surprised by how much I liked the oomph that this added to the track. It's just like this mix bus one preset that I like tweaked a little bit. Going into some RC20 for some color on a really low percentage. Going into virtual bus compressor, only doing like about a dB of gain reduction, and then into a limiter to bring it up to volume. So here's what all of it sounds like together. And yeah, that's what everything sounds like. If you enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe. Again, you can vote on what instrumental I do next. Mainly guitar-based pop stuff or indie pop stuff, but I don't know, surprise me. But yeah, I will see you guys next week.